all to participate with us in the recitation of the Holy Rosary, especially when we have stepped in this month of May that is dedicated to Our Lady, our dear Mother Mary. We ask all of us who join us in this Holy Rosary prayer to continue with us in this journey throughout this month of May, praying for each other, helping each other to grow closer to our Mother, our Lord's Mother, and seeking her help in our lives, in our families, in our vocation, in our surrounding, in every aspects of life. October is the month of the Most Holy Rosary. November, the month to pray for the faithful departed. June, we immerse ourselves in the ocean of mercy of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. July, we praise and worship the precious blood of Jesus, the price of our salvation. And May is the month of Mary. Mary is the daughter of God the Father, the mother of God the Son, and the mystical spouse of the Holy Spirit, the Queen of the angels, saints of heaven and earth. And Saint Louis de Montfort acclaims her as the Queen of all hearts and God's masterpiece of creation. And the saints acclaim in powerful, inspired, and often poetic terms the glories of the Blessed Virgin Mary. What might be some ways that we can manifest our love and devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary in her month, the month of Mary? One of the ways can be consecration. The first gesture we should do every morning is prayer. A prayer of consecration to Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Start of the day right through Mary. Saint Mother Teresa, moved by great love for Mary, said, "Mary, give me your heart so beautiful, so pure, so immaculate. Your heart so full of love and humility that I may be able to receive Jesus in the bread of life and love Him as you love Him and serve Him in the distressing guise of the poor."
Let's all make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Today we will meditate on Mary as the most perfect creature. She who is full of grace, the object of God's pleasure, exalted above all the angels and saints, lived an ordinary life. Mary is as much a creature as we are, with a heart like ours, made for joy and mirth as well as suffering and tears. Before Gabriel communicates to her God's plan, Our Lady does not know that she has been chosen from all eternity to be the mother of the Messiah. She sees herself as a lowly creature. That is why she can acknowledge with full humility that He who is mighty has done great things for her.
Oh, how we love Mary to praise you, honor your name, bless you always. You are Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and with Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. Amen.
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
for the increase in faith, hope, and charity, Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As today is Saturday, so we'll be having the joyful mystery.
First joyful mystery, the Annunciation. We pray for all the youths of the world, getting a call for holy orders and holy matrimony from God, so that we can get maximum number of priests, nuns, and couples having a thought of holiness. Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from all evil.
Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary,
Full of grace, the Lord is
with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who need the need of thy mercy. Amen.
my Lord's mother and my mother, keep your motherly grants, gran- grants always upon us. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Second joyful mystery, the visitation. In this decade, Jesus, as your mother, was received with joy by your Aunt Elizabeth. Lord, we pray for all those people who are stuck in different places due to the COVID-19 lockdown countrywise. As arrangements are being made for their return to their hometowns, we pray for their safety. Also, we ask Mama Mary for your intercession for the careful and secure arrangements being done for their stay, the checkup and treatments if any, so that no harm is done to anyone and everyone around remains safe. For this we pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy.
my Lord's mother and my mother, keep your motherly glance always upon us. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
The third joyful mystery, the birth of our Lord. In this decade, oh Mama. Please intercede for all the broken families who are getting time to spend with each other. And Mama, please intercede for them like you interceded on behalf of the apostles. So let's start this decade of the Rosary. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are most in need of thy mercy.
Amen. My Lord's mother and my mother, keep your motherly glance always upon us. Mary, seat of our wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fourth joyful mystery, the presentation in the temple. Lord, I offer all those people who are struggling with lust. Help them, Lord, that they might be able to subject their flesh to the Spirit. Lord, scatter the clouds of lustful thoughts, feelings, and imagination, and quench their fire of lust, and kindle the true light of chastity. Mother Mary, intercede for this intention. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy. Amen.
my Lord's mother, and my mother, keep your motherly glance always upon us. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
The fifth joyful mystery, the finding of Jesus in the temple. O Mother Mary, intercede for all those people who are seeking, finding a purpose in their lives, and they are finding about themselves, discovering themselves. And when we come across in this process, when often we come across our negativities, we tend to not to accept it and also go astray. Mother Mary, in this process, help so that we may accept our negativities as well as positivities, and in everything we may be able to bring your Son, Jesus, in between, who has the power of transforming everything. And hence, in this process, we may be able to seek a purpose in our lives and move ahead according to that purpose. A purpose that leads us to eternal life. For this we pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners,
Now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. O my Jesus,
forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell,
lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. My Lord's Mother and my Mother, keep your motherly glance always upon us. Mary, seat of wisdom,
pray for us.
Hail, Holy Queen,
Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping, in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious Advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
Let's all kneel down for the litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ hear us.
Christ graciously hear us.
God the Father of heaven,
Have mercy on us.
God the Son, Redeemer of the world,
Have mercy on us.
God the Holy Spirit,
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity, one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be, pray for us. Holy Mary,
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God,
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ,
Pray for us.
Mother of Divine Grace,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate,
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
Seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
Spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
Vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
Singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
Mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of ivory,
Pray for us.
House of gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of the covenant,
Pray for us.
Gate of heaven,
Pray for us.
Morning star,
Pray for us.
Health of the sick,
Pray for us.
Refuge of sinners,
Pray for us.
Comforter of the afflicted,
Pray for us.
Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
Queen of angels,
Pray for us.
Queen of patriarchs,
Pray for us.
Queen of prophets,
Pray for us.
Queen of apostles,
Pray for us.
Queen of martyrs,
Pray for us.
Queen of confessors,
Pray for us.
Queen of virgins,
Pray for us.
Queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
Queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
Queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
Queen of the most holy rosary,
Pray for us.
Queen of peace,
Pray for us.
Queen of family.
Pray for us.
Your response will be, spare us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world,
Spare us, O Lord.
Your response will be, graciously hear us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world.
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
Your response will be, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world.
Have mercy on us,
Pray for us, O Holy Mother of God,
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray.
Grant, we beseech thee, O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, be delivered from present sorrow, and enjoy eternal happiness, through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Let's all say the Memorare.
Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me.
Amen. This is a special prayer by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic COVID-19. Let's all say together. We
Fly
fly
to your protection, O Holy Mother of God, in the present tragic situation, when the whole world is prey to suffering and anxiety. We fly to you, Mother of God, and our Mother,
and
seek
seek
refuge
under your protection. Virgin Mary, turn your merciful eyes towards us
amidst this coronavirus pandemic. Comfort those who are distraught and mourn their loved ones who have died and at times are buried in a way that grieves them deeply. Be close to those who are concerned for their loved ones, who are sick and who, in order to prevent the spread of the disease, cannot be close to them. Fill with hope those who are troubled by the uncertainty of the future and the consequences for the economy and employment. Mother of God and our Mother, pray for us to God, the Father of mercies, that this great suffering may end, and that hope and peace may dawn anew. Plead with your divine Son, as you did at Cana, so that the families of the sick and the victims be comforted, and their hearts be opened to confidence and trust. Protect those doctors, nurses, health workers, and volunteers who are on the front line of this emergency and are risking their lives to save others. Support their heroic effort and grant them strength, generosity, and continued health. Be close to those who assist the sick night and day, and to priests who in the pastoral concern and fidelity to the gospel are trying to help and support everyone. Blessed Virgin, illumine the minds of men and women engaged in scientific research, that they may find effective solutions to overcome this virus. Support national leaders that with wisdom and solicitude and generosity they may come to the aid of those lacking the basic necessities of life, and may devise social and economic solutions inspired by farsightedness and solidarity. Mary Most Holy, stir our consciences so that the enormous funds invested in developing and stockpiling arms will instead be spent on promoting effective research on how to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Beloved Mother, help us realize that we are all members of one great family, and to recognize the bond that unites us, so that in a spirit of fraternity and solidarity
we can help to alleviate countless situations of poverty and need. Make us strong in faith, persevering in service, constant in prayer. Mary, consolation of the afflicted, embrace all your children in distress and pray that God will stretch out His all-powerful hand and free us from this terrible pandemic so that life can serenely resume its normal course. To you, who shine on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope, do we trust ourselves, O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
As I kneel before you, as I bow my head in prayer, take this day, make it yours, and fill me with your love. Ave Maria, gracia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu. All I have I give you, every dream and wish are yours. Mother of Christ, Mother of mine, present them to my Lord. Ave Maria, gracia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu, benedicta tu.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
As it was in the beginning, is now, and
shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Josemaria Escriva,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint John Paul II.
Pray for us.
Let's all make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us for the Rosary. And now, this Rosary will be followed by a Mass. So please enjoy the song till we decorate our altar.
Jesus, what a wonder you are. You are so gentle, so pure and so kind. You shine like a morning star. Jesus, what a wonder you are. Jesus, what a Savior you are. You are so gentle, What a Savior you are, Jesus. What a healer you are. You are so gentle, so pure and so kind. You shine Good evening, friends. Ace Choir welcomes you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Monsignor Father Robert Nuska. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for entrance hymn.
Now is the time to
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Brothers and sisters, let us now acknowledge our sins and so prepare ourselves to celebrate these mysteries. You were sent to heal the contrite of heart. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have
You
mercy.
came to call sinners. Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
You are seated at the right hand of the Father to intercede for us. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen.
Your
us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, who raised up the Bishop St. Athanasius as an outstanding champion of your Son's divinity, mercifully grant that, rejoicing in his teachings and his protection, we may never cease to grow in knowledge and love of you. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever.
Amen.
In today's first reading, we will get to know that Peter heals Ananias and Tabitha.
First reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 9, verses from 39 to 42. Meanwhile, the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria had peace and was built up, living in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit. It increased in numbers. Now, as Peter went here and there among all the believers, he came down also to the saints living in Lydda. There he found a man named Aeneas, who had been bedridden for 8 years, for he was paralyzed. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed. And immediately he got up. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time, she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples who heard that Peter was there sent 2 men to him with the request, please come to us without delay. So Peter got up and went with them. And when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, Tabitha, get up. Then she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
What return can I make to the Lord for all that He gives to me? What return can I make to the Lord the child of your servant girl. You have loosed my bonds. I will offer to you a thanksgiving sacrifice and call on the name of the Lord. What return can I make to the Lord for all that He gives to me?
Let's all rise for acclamation.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Your words, Lord, are spirit and life. You have the words of everlasting life. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
In today's Gospel reading, we will hear about the words of eternal life.
The Lord be with you.
And with your
A
spirit.
reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to the people, "Very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." When many of his disciples heard it, they said, "This teaching is difficult. Who can accept it?" But Jesus, being aware that his disciples were complaining about it, said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life, the flesh is useless. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But among you there are some who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones that did not believe, and who was the one who would betray him. And he said, "For this reason, I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father." Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. So Jesus asked the 12, Do you also wish to go away?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As tomorrow marks, again, the 57th World Day of Prayer for Vocations, I've been invited to offer some reflections on the importance of prayer for an increase in vocations in our time. And as I was preparing some thoughts, I remembered that back in 2002, I was in Montreal for the 3rd International Congress on Vocations. And at that time, about 1,200 people had gathered from different parts of the world. I have to say, it was very inspiring to see so many people, leaders, the laity, religious, all who had gathered to discuss, to share their reflections, but especially to pray for vocations. One of the speakers, the late Archbishop Joseph Pitau, was the Vatican Secretary for the Congregation of Education, and he gave a very, very insightful talk in which he observed that precisely amid the challenges and the crises being faced by the Church, it's so important for us to pray, and to pray for a profound rediscovery of the importance of the Christian vocation, beginning with the universal call to holiness that we share from the moment of our baptism. With regard to the difficulties facing the Church, the Archbishop pointed out that the Japanese word for crisis is made up of two characters, one meaning danger, the other meaning opportunity. And he called us again to pray that God would raise up a new culture of vocations in our time based upon our Lord's own teachings in the Beatitudes. For he said, "Where the Beatitudes are being lived, God is sure to raise up examples of holiness, of generosity, of total commitment. Men and women who are prayerful, joyful, and powerful in the Spirit. For God is love, God always loves, therefore God always calls new laborers into the harvest to complete his work on earth. So as the church and the world continue in our own time to deal with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, we must never forget that not only danger but opportunity are present in the midst of the crisis. We see this clearly in the biblical stories that deal with crisis and change on a mass scale. Here, whether we think of the story of the flood in the book of Genesis, or the plagues of the book of Revelation, or the call of Jesus to leave everything behind and to follow him on the way of the cross, as we see in today's gospel, all may involve crisis. What's important for us to see then is how the crisis has the power to overwhelm, but it has the potential to carry us forward through the power of prayer and through the miracle of God's grace. A psychologist writing in the 1940s about the story of the flood comments that the flood comes in the moment of crisis. To the majority it spells destruction, but to the hero, rebirth. Which it shall be depends upon whether a person is wise enough to adapt themselves to the experience of the onrushing waters. In so doing, then, to see in the crisis the opportunity to ride out the waters of the storm and emerge to a new heaven and a new earth. Many centuries ago, it was St. Maximus of Turin who said, "The church is called out into the deep, delving into the profound mysteries of heaven. This boat, that is the church, sails upon the deeps of this world, like Noah's Ark, preserving unharmed those who are in it." So it is that the church calls us, like Noah or St. Peter, like the earliest disciples, to go forth prayerfully into the deep. First and foremost, into the depths of the mysteries of heaven, so as to be able then to minister to others amid the stormy waters of time, and to win others to the gospel and to everlasting life. In the face of whatever difficulties, we know that Christ is always with us in the boat. Augustine here reminds us that even the boat may be shaken up, it is always the boat, capable of transporting the disciples and always capable of receiving Christ. This boat sails on a dangerous journey, he writes, yet without it, one would perish quickly. So again, the importance of prayer at all times. Likewise, it was now St. Pope John Paul II who speaks of setting out into the deep waters, precisely in these challenging times. As a community of faith, we're called together to a renewed life of prayer, a spirit of charity, a spirit of communion. And so your prayers are so very important at the present time. Just to give one example, when I entered the seminary back in 1983, the members of the prayer group in my home parish, St. Edward the Confessor here in Toronto, were praying the Rosary every single day for vocations. To me personally, it was no coincidence that from this one parish, there were 6 young men studying for the priesthood and others considering a vocation. One need only look today at those parishes that have Eucharistic adoration on a very regular basis to see how the Holy Spirit continues to be at work in helping our young people to hear the call of God over the roar of the world. And so your own prayers, again, are very important. At the same time, I think that we need to pray not only for vocations, but we need to pray for new saints in our time. Here again, John Paul reminds us that holy men and women have always been the source and origin of renewal in the most difficult circumstances throughout the Church's history. Today, he writes, we have a tremendous need of saints for whom we must unceasingly implore God. God calls forth then not only vocations to priesthood and religious life, but calls all of us to this renewed commitment to the kind of Christian heroism and sanctity that have been the marks of the saints and the blesseds through the ages. Yes, a time of crisis, but a time of great opportunity. So as we continue to celebrate this Mass, we pray through the intercession of St. Athanasius that we may renew our life of prayer, that we may always be attentive to the movings, the stirrings of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. Let us pray for the grace to follow our Lord into the profound mysteries of heaven, knowing in the words of the prophet Jeremiah, that the plans I have you, says the Lord our God, are plans for your good, not for evil, to give you a future and to give you hope. Let us now make our prayers and petitions to God in heaven. We pray for all those discerning a vocation to the priesthood or religious life throughout the world. We pray to the Lord. For the example of all who live the Beatitudes, that they may inspire our young people to dedicate their lives to the love and the service of God and of neighbor, we pray to the Lord. For all those in the daily TV Mass community who have asked to be included in our prayer intentions book, especially those asking for peace in their families, we pray to the Lord. Heavenly Father, we ask you to hear the prayers we made and those that remain deep within our hearts, for we make them all through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Pray, brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands for the reason you have for our good and good of all His holy church.
Look, O Lord, upon the offerings that we present to you in commemoration of St. Athanasius, and may witnessing to your truth bring salvation to those who profess, as he did, an unblemished faith. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation at all times to acclaim you, O Lord, but in this time, above all, to laud you yet more gloriously when Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed. For with the old order destroyed, a universe cast down is renewed, and integrity of life is restored to us in Christ. Therefore, overcome with paschal joy, every land, every people exults in your praise. Even the heavenly powers and the angelic hosts sing together the unending hymn of your glory as they acclaim.
Holy, holy, holy.
indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and giving thanks broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and once more giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world, and bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis, our Pope, Thomas, our Bishop, and all the clergy. Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with Blessed Joseph, her spouse, with the blessed apostles, St. Athanasius, and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him, and with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
At the Savior's command, informed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you," look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit.
Lamb of God,
You take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb.
Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof,
But
but
only
only
say
say
the
a
word,
word,
and my
and my
soul
soul
shall
shall
be
be
healed.
healed.
Since we cannot receive the Holy Communion, let us now remember our first Holy Communion and also our best moment when we received the blood and body of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and Mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart. Since now I cannot receive him sacramentally, be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen. I am the God that healeth thee. I am the Lord, your healer. I Let us say the prayer after communion of Saint Thomas Aquinas. I pray you, Lord. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having been pleased, through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me, a sinner, your unworthy servant, with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all those desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss when you will call me. I pray that you bring me, a sinner, to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say the prayer for priest of Saint Therese of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart. When none may touch them, keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Grant us, we pray, Almighty God, that the true divinity of your only begotten Son, which we firmly profess with Saint Athanasius, may through this sacrament ever give us life and protection through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Go forth, the Mass is ended.
Thanks be to God. As I kneel before you, as I bow my head in prayer, take this day, Abba Father, Lord Jesus, we love you. Lord, because of your love, we are still alive till now. We are able to breathe, we are able to see, we are able to feel. In the past and now also in present, we have done many things and which does not even compensate with the sorry. Lord, then also the faults that we have done in the present time or in the past, Lord, we are guilty for that and we ask sorry. Lord, we know that you are merciful and you always loved us. You have shown that everlasting love. You have given that everlasting love to us. We have felt your love. Help us, Lord, that each and every day that we are seeing or we will be seeing, help us that every day we can see that day with the love. We can start that day with the love. Help us, Lord, that we may always rejoice, be joyful and powerful in the Spirit. And we can only be joyful and powerful in the Spirit when we'll always respond to the call of yours. Help us that we can respond it each and every time. For this, we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Hallelujah. Rejoice, for he who merit no despair. Hallelujah. He is risen as he foretold. Hallelujah. Pray for us to the Father. Hallelujah.
Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary, hallelujah.
For the Lord has truly risen. Hallelujah.
Let us pray.
O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Escriva, pray for us. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed weekend. Stay safe and take precautions.
As ACE Choir has also initiated daily Rosary prayer, especially during this month of May that is dedicated to Our Lady, Blessed Virgin Mary. Do join us for the Holy Rosary at 5 p.m. just before the virtual Holy Mass. Participate with us in this journey throughout this month of May. Also, invite your friends and family members to join us in this recitation.